By paying more wages than the average, he received more service and better service than the average. At a single stroke, through the inauguration of that minimum wage policy, best labor on the market and placed a premium upon the privilege of working in his plant. I have no authentic figures at hand bearing on the subject, but I have sound reason to conjecture that for every $5 Ford spent under his policy, he received at least $7.50 worth of service. I have also sound reason to believe that this policy enabled Ford to reduce the cost of supervision because employment in his plant became so desirable that no worker would care to run the risk of losing his position by soldiering on the job or rendering poor service. Where other employees were forced to depend upon costly supervision in order to get the service to which they were entitled, Ford got the same or better service by the less expensive method of placing a premium upon employment in his plant. Marshall Field was probably the leading merchant of his time, and the great Field store in Chicago stands today as a monument to his ability to apply the law of increasing returns. A customer purchased an expensive lace waist at the Field store, but did not wear it. 2 years later, she gave it to her niece as a wedding present. The niece quietly returned the waist to the Field store and exchanged it for other merchandise, despite the fact that it had been out for more than 2 years and was then out of style. Not only did the Field store take back the waist, but what is most important, it did so without argument. Of course, there was no obligation, moral or legal, on the part of the store to accept the return of the waist at that late date, which makes the transaction all the more significant. The waist was originally priced at $50, and of course it had to be thrown on the bargain counter and sold for whatever it would bring. But the keen student of human nature will understand that the Field store not only did not lose anything on the waist, but it actually profited by the transaction to an extent that cannot be measured in mere dollars. The woman who returned the waist knew that she was not entitled to a rebate. Therefore, when the store gave her that to which she was not entitled, the transaction won her as a permanent customer. But the effect of the transaction did not end there. It only began. For this woman spread the news of the fair treatment she had received at the Field store, far and near. It was the talk of the woman of her set for many days. And the Field store received more advertising from the transaction than it could have purchased in any other way with 10 times the value of the waist. The success of the Field store was built largely upon Marshall Field's understanding of the law of increasing returns, which prompted him to adopt, as a part of this business policy, the slogan, "The customer is always right." When you do only that for which you are paid, there is nothing out of the ordinary to attract favorable comment about the transaction. But when you are willing to do more than that for which you are paid, your action attracts the favorable attention of all who are affected by the transaction and goes another step towards establishing a reputation that will eventually set the law of increasing returns to work in your behalf. For this reputation will create a demand for your services far and wide. Carol Downs went to work for W.C. Durant, the automobile manufacturer, in a minor position. He is now Mr. Durant's right-hand man and the president of one of his automobile distributing companies. He promoted himself into this profitable position solely through the aid of the law of increasing returns, which he put into operation by rendering more service and better service than that for which he was paid. In a recent visit with Mr. Downs, I asked him to tell me how he managed to gain promotion so rapidly. In a few brief sentences, he told me the whole story. When I first went to work with Mr. Durant, said he, I noticed that he always remained at the office long after all the others had gone home for the day, and I made it my business to stay there also. No one asked me to stay, but I thought someone should be there to give Mr. Durant any assistance he may need. Often he would look around for someone to bring him a letter file or render some other trivial service, and always he found me ready there to serve him. He got into the habit of calling on me. This is about all there is to the story. He got into the habit of calling on me.
I've sent you a
Read
link.
that sentence again for its full meaning of the richest sort. Why did Mr. Durant get into the habit of calling on Mr. Downs? Because Mr. Downs made it his business to be on hand where he could be seen. He deliberately placed himself in Mr. Durant's way in order that he might render service that would place the law of increasing returns back of him. Was he told to do this? No. Was he paid to do this? Yes. He was paid by the opportunity it offered for him to bring himself to the attention of the man who had it within his power to promote him. We are now approaching the most important part of this lesson, because this is an appropriate place in which to suggest that you have the same opportunity to make use of the law of increasing returns that Mr. Downs had. And you can go about the application of the law in exactly the same way that he did, by being on hand and ready to volunteer your services in the performance of work which others may shirk because they are not paid to do it. Stop. Don't say it. Don't even think it if you have the slightest intention of springing the old time-worn phrase entitled, "But my employer is different." Of course he is different. All men are different in most respects, but they are very much alike in this. They are somewhat selfish. In the fact they are selfish enough not to want a man such as Carroll Downs to cast his lot with their competitor. And this very selfishness may be made to serve you as an asset and not as a liability if you have the good judgment to make yourself so useful that the person to whom you sell your services cannot get along without you. One of the most advantageous promotions I ever received came about through an incident which seemed so insignificant that it appeared to be unimportant. One Saturday afternoon, a lawyer whose office was on the same floor as that of my employer came in and asked if I knew where he could get a stenographer to do some work which he was compelled to finish that day. I told him that all of our stenographers had gone to the ball game, that I would have gone had he called 5 minutes earlier, but that I would be very glad to stay and do his work, as I could go to ball game any day, and his work had to be done then. I did the work for him, and when he asked how much he owed me, I replied, "Oh, about $1,000 as long as it's for you. And if it were for anyone else, I wouldn't charge anything." He smiled and thanked me. Little did I think when I made that remark that he would ever pay me $1,000 for an afternoon's work, but he did. 6 months later, after I had entirely forgotten the incident, he called on me again and asked how much salary I was receiving. When I told him, he informed me that he was ready to pay me that $1,000 which I had so laughingly said I would charge him for the work. I had performed for him, and he did pay it by giving me a position at $1,000 a year increase in salary. Unconsciously, I had put the law of increasing returns to work in my behalf that afternoon, by giving up the ball game and rendering a service which was obviously rendered out of a desire to be helpful and not for the sake of any monetary consideration. It was not my duty to give up my Saturday afternoon, but it was my privilege. Furthermore, it was a profitable privilege, because it yielded me $1,000 in cash and a much more responsible position than the one I had formerly occupied. Downs' duty to be on hand until the usual quitting time, but it was his privilege to remain at his post after the other workers had gone. Properly exercised brought him greater responsibility and a salary that yields him more in a year than he would have made in a lifetime in the position he occupied before he exercised the privilege. I have been thinking for more than 25 years of this privilege of performing more service and better service than for what one is paid. And my thoughts have led me to the conclusion that a single hour devoted each day to rendering service for which we are not paid can be made to yield bigger returns than we received from the entire remainder of the day during which we are merely performing our duty. We are still in the neighborhood of the most important part of this lesson. Therefore, think and assimilate as you pass over these pages. The law of increasing returns is no invention of mine, nor do I lay claim to the discovery of the principle of rendering more service and better service than paid for as a means of utilizing this law. I merely appropriated them after many years of careful observation of those forces which enter into the attainment of success, just as you will appropriate them after you understand their significance. You might begin this appropriation process now by trying an experiment which may easily open your eyes and place back of your efforts powers that you did not know you possessed. Let me caution you, however, not to attempt this experiment in the same spirit a certain woman experimented with the biblical passage, which says something to the effect that